Hey, what's up, everybody? Camera Work Podcast. I am John Ricard. We have a guest today, which always excites me because we don't always have guests. This is Susan McVeigh, who I consider to be an expert in sales, which is why I wanted her here to talk to us. Hi, Susan.
Hi, John. I'm super excited to be here.
All right. Thank you. Now, the majority of people who listen to this are photographers, but we do get other creatives as well. And I think, at least with photographers, and I want to see what your experience is with this in other fields besides photographers, sometimes I think people have a problem with making this transition between doing something that they love and then turning it into something that they're selling. And that can be a very uncomfortable thing, I think, for any artist to do. Do you find that in other areas besides artists?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work predominantly with individuals, entrepreneurs who are selling a service. So essentially, coach, consultant, speaker, thought leader, an expert, professional service provider, where it's kind of an intangible, right? You're not selling a pen or a widget or something physical that you have, even though you may have created it with your own hands or your own design. It is something that you have to explain in order to sell it.
Okay.
And as a result, it can feel like you're selling yourself, which isn't comfortable.
Not at all. But do you think that if a person is like, give me an example of a field that you would not say is an art field, where someone might still feel uncomfortable about making that transition?
Accounting. So I had a past client who worked as a CFO in the Silicon Valley and became a consultant, and then still had consulting, but then also did business coaching, but with a very, very strong finance background. And that was not comfortable for her. So she was struggling to figure out, how do I communicate this? How do I package myself? How do I articulate what's valuable to the people that I want to serve and help? How do I put a price point on all of this?
But how does she start off being an accountant? I mean, in other words, in photography, very often you start off photographing things just because you love doing it. It's a lot of fun. And then you say, well, wait a minute, maybe I can make some money on this. But if someone enters into accounting, are they doing that same kind of path where they're doing taxes for free?
No, not necessarily. So typically what ends up happening is they would most likely they've gone to school, they have gotten a degree or some kind of certification, they've taken a job, and then if they've decided that I no longer want to do this for somebody else, I want to do this for myself, then they're starting their own business, whether as a consultant or as a coach, or even just having their own business doing taxes for others. Depending on where their clientele is coming from, the type of service that they're actually performing, they may or may not perform the service for free, but they definitely are going to need to have some kind of body of work in order to prove that they are legitimate, right? That they actually can deliver the service. Whether that's, I'm going to take a few clients at a much reduced rate or a lower price point, or maybe I do it as an exchange or barter for services. I know that is often sometimes commonplace in like the creative field, right? Where we'll trade for services. Yeah. And so there are sometimes areas where that also makes sense.
Right. The problem in the photography area is this, and this is how I look at this is how it should be. If let's say I'm a photographer and I wanted to photograph a model, and then I approach the model and I approach a fashion stylist, I approach a makeup artist, I approach a hair person, and I say, let's put together a shoot. To me, it should be a collaboration where everyone is benefiting. We sit and discuss, what do you need for your book? What do you need? What do you need? Okay, what shoot can we do that everybody can get something that they need? But the part that's offensive in photography is people will sometimes approach you and say, I have this great opportunity for you to build your book, photographing my clothing line. And you're like, I don't need those images. That doesn't benefit me. You want me to work for free? I'm not interested. And we also get a situation in photography, and these are obviously bad situations, where everyone is getting paid except you. They're going to say to you, we've got a great hair person, a great makeup person, a great model. They're paying those people, and then they're saying to you, oh, it's a great opportunity for you to build your book. And I always look at it like, no, there shouldn't be one person not being paid. If it's a good opportunity, it can be a good opportunity with a check as well. But whether you're the makeup person, the hair person, or the photographer, if everyone else is being paid, you should be paid as well.
I agree. I agree. And I mean, if if you go and listen to my podcast episode about, you know, why giving away free isn't the problem, you may think that I'm contradicting myself, but I'm not. In this instance, what you've just described is where everybody else is being paid. So there is obviously a budget. There is an allocation of funds and resources that simply aren't being equally distributed, which I don't think is fair. I mean, at some point, this is your bread and butter. You can't take exposure to the bank and expect your banker to be like, hey,
Right,
you know, my rent is coming out in 2 days. I just got a
right,
million views on.
right. And you know, it's funny. I have this idea. I don't do comedy videos at all, but I have this idea that'd be very funny if you just had the right person to do it and to film it, where someone has this exposure, like these magazines that were printed, that the pictures in a magazine, or websites that publish their work, and then they go, give me a slice of pizza, and then when a guy says $4, they look at this magazine, look at this blog that I'm in, and the person's going, what? It's exposure. It could be a funny skit that someone could film, not me, but somebody could make that into a funny little skit about how useless exposure is.
It is. And I think sometimes people say that to create a false win. And
Right,
to me, that is, I hate saying it, but I'm going to say it. It's taking the lazy rate, the
right,
lazy way out, right? Because I think if we actually take a moment
right,
to really put ourselves in the other person's shoes and think,
right,
if this was me, what would I appreciate? What would I need to happen in order
right,
for this to be a win, for this to be a yes?
right.
If everybody else is getting paid, I need to get paid. And I
Yeah,
think there's nothing wrong in saying, I respectfully decline because at this point, I am looking for paid
right,
opportunities to do A, B, and C.
right,
And you are an artist, a creative, regardless of where your area of focus is, chances are you're putting something out in the world for free in order to connect with your audience, to make sure that you
right.
are being seen as the
Right, you're
go-to.
already doing the free work without
Yeah,
this person stepping in and asking you to do it, you know.
exactly.
And
You're
I
already,
know, as someone who has photographed for a very long time, I've actually tried to protect my industry, meaning when someone approaches me, I remember a young girl who said to me she wanted to do nails on some of the shoots that I was doing for a magazine. And I said, well, the magazine won't pay for it. She said, no, it's okay. It's good exposure for me. I'll do it for free. And I said, no, I can't let you give that to the magazine for free. I can't. If it was a shoot that I was doing where I'm not getting paid and no one else is being paid, fine. I'm okay with you working for free, but I can't invite you to the set when everyone else is being paid and you're not being paid because you're getting exposure. We're all getting exposure, but we're all getting a check. It's not fair for the magazine to get you for free when they had to pay for everyone else. And I felt that's trying to protect my industry so she doesn't come up the wrong way in the industry.
I love that. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who probably wouldn't have taken that approach that you did, and
Right,
she may not even recognize what a
right,
lesson you taught her in that moment, because I think it's part of being in integrity to your brand and your personal
mhm,
values, and being able to understand that you have value regardless of whether or not somebody's able to pay you in that moment. Like, that is not an indicator of how much
right,
you are appreciated or
right.
how you can ask for what you want in return.
Right. Now, one of the things that I thought was interesting when I was listening to one of your things on sales, I forget the title now. When you're talking about, what was the episode that you did where you were talking about making the transition from free to paid products or free to paid services? Do you remember what the episode is called?
Yeah, I have to double check, and we can probably put it in the show notes. It is, I think it was the episode before last.
Yeah, it's very recent.
Yeah, while your free calls are not converting, something like that. Is that the one that you're thinking
I'm
of?
not sure if that's it. I just know what is on it that I want to talk about. I'll just make a different transition and let me just jump into that again. Okay. Right. So on the subject of working for free again, and you mentioned this earlier, you, like myself, you're not making this hard line in the sand saying you can never work for free. But one of the things that you point out is that whatever you're offering for free, there should be some type of connected,
Mm.
paid, staircase that's going to get that person to the paid
Yes.
option. So can you just explain a little bit of that?
Yeah, for sure. Because I think sometimes we hear conflicting messages, right? I mean, you know that you need to show up on social media. There's a lot of people in our ear saying like, give, 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 value, value, value. And I 100% agree with that. But I think sometimes where we go wrong, especially as business owners, wanting to not only make more impact, but ultimately make as much money as we can while we're doing this, because we are not a charity, we're not in the business of not making
Right.
money, is that there's no connection between what we're putting out for free and how we want people to pay us. And when there is no clear path for your potential customers, like the people that you want to buy from you, they actually don't know what steps they need to take. They get confused. And I love quoting Donald Miller from StoryBrand. He says, when you confuse, you lose, because
Right.
that's what happens when we are so
Right.
confused. If you've ever been in a situation where you go, what is the point? I don't understand what's going on here. Or you come to
Right.
know somebody for something, and then all of a sudden they're trying to sell you into a different experience or a different product or promotion.
Right.
And then you almost wonder, what just happened? Is this the
Right.
same person?
Right.
They start to
Can you
leave.
think of an example that works, an example from any field where someone has a free offering and a paid offering, and in your mind that is actually a really nice connection between those two different things?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can share an example from my own business, and then I'll give one from one of my clients. So when I first started off in my business, focusing on sales, right, and specifically around sales conversations, what I noticed was people were struggling with pricing objections, like hearing "I can't afford it," and so the freebie that I offered, that very specifically addressed this, was 3 strategies how to turn "I can't afford it" into "sign me up." So that was a free gift that I gave in exchange for an email, what we like to call an ethical bribe. And the whole purpose why I produced this free piece of content was because I knew that at some point my signature program, Sell with More Ease, around sales conversations, which breaks down like when you are on a sales call, when you have a discovery conversation, when you are enrolling
Right.
people into your program, what do you need to say and how do you need to say it?
Right.
So there's a direct tie-in,
Right.
right? If you weren't having sales conversations, you wouldn't need my first thing in the first place. Like you wouldn't need
Right.
that. It wouldn't make sense
Right.
to you because you wouldn't hear
Right.
I wouldn't
But
afford
we're
it.
at least putting that bug in their ear, getting that thought in their mind in the free product. And then there's a paid product that goes into more detail about how to actually execute it. Is that a
Exactly.
fair thing?
Exactly. Yeah. So one of my clients works as a content marketing strategist. And so her free piece of content is a video training. She helps people turn one piece of content into 32 pieces of content in under
Wow.
30 minutes.
That's interesting. From one
Yeah.
piece of video that they filmed or something?
Yeah, essentially it could be
Wow.
anything. It could be a checklist, and it helps you
Wow.
break down like how can you multi-purpose and repurpose that
Right.
idea that you've
Right.
come up with without having to come up, because that's the number one thing that for her audience, they say,
Right.
"Oh my gosh, like I don't know what to write. I can't come up with the ideas. They're not
Right.
necessarily maybe as creative as your audience is." And so they want to
Right.
save time and want to be able to still be present on social media and put out the content that
Right.
they put out. So that video training walks them through, here, if you have one piece of content, here's how you create, 32 other pieces from that.
Right.
It
And
allows them to kind of get their juices spinning. And then the
right.
paid piece is if you actually want to map out 3 months worth of content in
Mhm.
one day, you can spend a VIP intensive day with her and she'll
Got
actually
it. Right.
help you create that.
Right. And again, so she's put the idea in your mind that one piece of content can turn into more pieces of content that's in the free. But
Yeah,
now to get that one-on-one experience where she sits down and hand holds you, here's how you can take this content you created step by step. There's the upsell, which makes
exactly.
sense. Now, I want to talk to you about social media, but before we do that, because when you mentioned content, you reminded me of something that you do. Can you, because you send out an email every day, is that correct?
No, I send out, it depends. If you're brand new to my community, my email
Right.
list, and you've taken advantage of a free gift, then you might get an email every day, every couple of days or so, really just to make sure that we're a good fit, so that
Right.
I can kind of love up on you and make sure that you're getting some additional value, some resources that I think might be helpful. Because most
Right.
of the time, if somebody has put up their hand to say, I'm interested in this topic, it's
Right.
because they have a need. It's because they're thinking,
Right.
gosh, I'm curious, or I have a problem, and there is a prime opportunity to see how you can step in and help that
Right.
individual, and get them either the help that they need or ultimately buying from you. I mean, that's really
Right.
what we want as
Right.
business. Yeah.
Right. Tell me your site again, just so we can make sure it's clear here. The site, your site.
My website is susanmcvea.com, and my last name is spelled Mcvea.
Right. But how hard is it for you to come up with the content that you're sending out?
So
Because
I'm a
sometimes I struggle with that myself.
I know. And for me, I don't. I have a lot of ideas. And I think that as creatives, you're probably overthinking it. Every time that I've talked to somebody that has the same problem that you have, John, where you're like, oh, I sometimes struggle to come up with ideas. What I want you to think
Right.
about right now is, what are some of the most common questions that people ask?
Right.
Because when people ask you questions that are in your area of expertise, you don't even think about it. You're just like, oh, you can do this or this or this or this. Done. But
Right.
what you don't realize is that every single question that's asked could be a potential piece of content. And instead of just answering that one person, you could
Mhm.
take that information that
Right.
you've just
That's it
provided
out. Mhm.
and send it out and just say, hey, John just asked me this question and I thought this might help somebody else. So here's
Right.
a blog post, or here's a podcast, or even
Right.
an email that I wanted to write so that I could walk you through the different steps.
Right.
And I think that is super helpful for other people to be able to feel like they're not alone too.
Right. I think the thing that I struggle with personally is that the content that comes natural to me, or the questions that come natural to answer,
Mm.
are questions and answers to other photographers. But when I'm actually marketing my service, I don't really market my services to other photographers. There's very little marketing that I do where there's something that I'm selling to other photographers.
Right.
Mostly what I'm selling is a photography service to people who are looking to brand themselves or be photographed a certain way. So there becomes this kind of disconnect of, the
Hmm.
questions to me are about photography, and I enjoy that. I can talk all day about lighting and how to photograph something, but it doesn't necessarily benefit me, since this thing I'm trying to sell is a photo shoot, not a photo course. So there's that little disconnect that I struggle with sometimes.
Interesting. Well, and this is where
Yeah.
I would say your market is telling you what they want. And now it's just a matter
Right.
of whether or not you want to serve them. So you have a built-in market of photographers
Right.
who are saying, we want help to learn from your expertise. So it
Right.
could be a potential for a complementary market to what it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah.
So I'm answering your question, two things. The questions that you're getting, John, around your photographer friends, for me,
Right.
I would, the mercenary in me, but also the servant leader in me is saying,
Mhm.
serve those people. They're asking for your
Right.
help.
Okay.
So, sir, I think it's incumbent upon you, if you have the bandwidth,
Mhm.
to create
Mhm.
something that could help them and to answer their questions, where you're not again having to do these one-offs. It's like, hey, because you so many of you have been asking these questions, I
Right.
created a program to help you and to deliver
Okay.
that. Boom, done.
Right.
And from the perspective of your current market, the one that you
Mhm.
are actively seeking to market and
Right.
solicit yourself to, it becomes really less so about the technical nuts and bolts about photography, that perhaps your photographers are needing, and more about how, like, what photography means to them. Why would they want to get new brand photos taken?
Right.
It's more aspirational content. So I think a lot of it
Right.
is going to be visual imagery, but it's also
Mhm.
even thinking about, what are some of the things that you have to tell your models, I'm using that in air quotes, right?
Mhm.
The individuals that book these shoots with you, what do you wish that they would know in order to really be prepared
Right.
for
Coming into the
your,
shoot.
yeah,
Right. Right.
right? Are there certain tips that you can give around, like, these colors photograph the best, how to feel your best when you show
Right.
up to a photo shoot? Here's some some things that you want to consider when you
Right. I understand. Educating them
or,
in that way. Like I'll
yeah.
photograph jujitsu practitioners sometimes. And
That's
then, and they're expecting that the shoot's going to take place on a jujitsu mat and they're going to do some techniques. And we do that. And then I'm like, okay, we need to get some shots at your house. And they're like, wait, what? Like, I don't do jujitsu in my house. And I'm like, no, but that's important too. We want to see that. And they don't understand that sometimes. And that's
yeah.
part
So
of, like you said, that client education part.
yeah, so that would be really fun for everybody else to understand why you're telling them that, right? And so
Right.
even just to be able to create a vignette and a storyline around the behind the scenes. So there's a
Right.
lot of really cool ways to bring your audience into the experience in the moment when you are selling a service like you're selling. I
Right.
think we underestimate the power of, because you take it for every day, right? Like it's just your everyday
Right.
life. But
Of
for the
course.
rest of us that don't,
Right. They're surprised
yeah,
again, which is what I'm saying about the house. To him, that's
yeah,
ordinary, but to everyone else, it's interesting to see
it's
how
like
does this person
why?
live. Right. It's
Yeah,
interesting.
right. Yeah.
So I want to jump over to social media for a second, okay? So you did an episode talking about how to do social media without being spammy, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So how do we find a podcast for someone who wants to hear it rather than hear us talking about some of those things? Where is it? What is it called? How do we find it?
Absolutely. So it's across all podcast thingies. I don't even know what they're called. That's
Platforms, maybe? I'm not even
yeah,
sure.
the podcast feeds. It's called Master the Sales Game. And you can also go and listen to it directly off of my website, susanmcveigh.com/podcast.
Right. And you also do a good summary of it where you really break down what you spoke about on the podcast. I like that a lot as well, because you might look at the title and say, do I want to hear that episode? And then glance at the notes. And when I find the notes interesting, it makes me want to hear the actual podcast and not sort of cheat and just read the notes. So I think that's a smart thing.
Oh,
I've
yeah.
done it on mine where I've summarized the podcast as like a couple of paragraphs, but I've never done it with this pure breakdown the way you do it. It gave me the idea. So maybe I should try that and really sit and break it down into more detail, But in terms of social media, I thought this might be interesting, okay? If we each give 2 mistakes that we think people can make, that people sometimes make on social media, okay? 2 mistakes, okay? I'm going to start because I love this topic, okay? And here's one that I see fairly often, okay? I'll see people, okay, often people use, say, Instagram to give advice to other people. But I think for me, it often comes across that you're giving the advice to yourself as much as you're giving it to everyone else. It's like verbalizing an affirmation. So I'll see people say things like, in 2020, like, we're not working for free anymore. We're going to make sure we're charging our clients and we're going to ignore all requests that come in. And I say, like, to me, when you do that, if you don't do it right, at least, but when you do it, it's just, you're just letting everyone know that you are working for free too much, or you're attracting people that just keep expecting you to work for free, or you've worked for free too much, or you've been taken advantage of too much. And it doesn't make you look like a leader putting out this great information. It's like you're just communicating that things are really not going well for you. Because again, I'm feeling like that advice you're giving me, you're really giving to yourself. Because sometimes I'm looking at the advice going, I don't have that problem. You're writing it for me, but that's not my problem. Maybe that's your problem. So that's one for me, is this type of, you understand, this advice that just reveals where you are, and that's not a good thing for you to do.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting take. I think it comes down to the intention, right? Because we put stuff out with maybe the best of intentions, but maybe sometimes not. I think there needs to be a bit of a filtering process. So I think for me on social media, one of the missteps that I often see, it kind of goes in line with what you just shared, John, is that there's kind of 2 buckets. It's either, and I struggle with this, so I'm just going to throw myself out there, either being too branded and too professional and too businessy, right? Like
That's
all
a good
business.
one.
Or too personal, it's like too much of the messy, and not enough of like normalcy. So it kind of feels very bipolar. And God forbid we have somebody who's doing both, where it's like, it's all business on the side, and then we, part in the front.
I think the solution to that, and I struggle with it as well at times, but I think the solution to it is to say for Instagram, which is so visual, how do you put the professional and the personal? And I
Mhm.
think the way you do it is, as again, from a photography standpoint,
Yeah.
the professional tends to look very good. They're great photographs, right? Because it's your professional photography. Or let's say your accountant, let's say they hired someone to photograph them as an accountant. So those pictures look great and look professional. So then we say, well, why does the personal not look, doesn't match the professional? Because sometimes those personal pictures are just done on an iPhone, or they're
Mhm.
done too quickly without any thought. But I think if you can elevate the quality of the personal photography, it can actually live with the professional. And that doesn't mean you have to fake it. It just means it could still be that picture of you, barefoot, in a pair of shorts, reading an iPad on the couch. It can be that, but that photograph needs to be as good as the photograph of that accountant working
Mm.
in an office. And I think that's kind of the solution that I've found with that, is trying to take, what I try to do is when I post the family pictures, I try to make it that those photographs are as good as the photographs of my professional work. And then hopefully they can coexist together. But sometimes I'll see that disconnect that you're saying, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
I think sometimes it's, where we can have a little bit more fun, especially on a platform like Instagram,
right.
is to use stories for more of the personal
The
impromptu,
story is where I think you can get away with the quality being lower. I
a little
think
bit lower.
that's where, yeah, you can get the lower quality and it doesn't have to be good. But I think once it's on that real feed,
On the feed. Yeah.
the quality should be consistently good between the personal and the professional. I'm going to give one more thing I think people do wrong on social media, and I'm going to ask you for one more. Okay.
Yeah.
So here's another one that I find. Again, I'm staying on Instagram though, is I find people with a lot of followers, and you'll definitely appreciate this because again, you're coming from the standpoint of sales, and there is not even an attempt to monetize it. And I think that's a mistake. And I follow a lot of people in my world that do hair, that do makeup, that model, that do fashion styling. These are very visual things. So often those accounts can get a lot of followers, much more followers than your accountant.
Hmm.
It's not as visual to have a makeup person. And there's all of these great pictures of makeup being done, final results, before and afters, a ton of followers. And I'll show it to people sometimes, and I'll say, if you wanted to spend money, let's say you wanted to give this person work, how would you do it? There's no indication of what state they're in. There's no product that is being sold. Maybe there's a link to a website. That website has nothing that I can buy. There's no book. There's no video. There's no fly me to your state and I'll do makeup for you. There's no attempt to monetize it. And I don't think that has to be a bad thing to monetize it. I mean, that doesn't have to be a negative thing. Maybe someone loves what you do so much that they want more, like we talked about with the free ebook, and they want more. At least make the attempt to have something that if they want to make a purchase, they can make a purchase. Maybe one out of 5,000 people are going to buy it, but I know people with 60,000 followers on Instagram, and there's nothing at all monetized, no attempt to monetize at all.
Yeah. I mean, fans don't really mean that you have a business. And so I think
Right.
that's super important. I totally agree with you too, John. I think it's a matter of just thinking of ways to serve your audience, right? Like give them more of what they already are there and
Right.
potentially asking for. And I think that is the main thing, that if you can just think of one thing, if you have a lot of followers and you're allowing some of them to be able to just keep being encouraged to ride along with you, they will. Not everybody will, but what if
Right.
there were just a handful? Wouldn't that be more than what you currently have? And I think we are taking
Right.
for granted that people are going to jump through hoops, and they're not. So
Right.
for me, the other thing on social media is that we are often, um, well, two things. We're either not willing to have conversations at all, and it's like we're just like being spoken at, right? Like shouted at.
Okay.
It's
Right.
very preachy.
Mhm.
Or on the flip side, it is all about the sale and like going too fast and
Right.
just like sliding into the DMs. Like every time you get a
Mhm.
new follower, oh, slide in, like buy my thing, join my
Right.
group, click this
Mhm.
link. What? It's it's overwhelming.
It's
And I
overwhelming. Right.
it
Right.
is, right? And I think that there's those two very divergent buckets, because the people who really mean well, maybe like the folks that you're following, and you notice that they have these huge followers and big
Mhm.
audiences, and they're obviously serving really well, but they're
Right.
scared to monetize. They're scared to make an offer, and they're
Right.
worried about what people are going to say or think.
But the way you phrased it is interesting, that look at it not as how can I get money from the followers, but how can I serve them
Mm.
deeper? How can I serve them at a higher level? How can I serve them more completely? Look at it that way. And of course, for that, you're going to charge, because that's going to take up more time, it's taking you away from your family, taking you away from your other money making ventures. And looking at it from that perspective, I think can help a lot, you know?
Yeah, for
And
sure.
and you mentioned this idea of overwhelming people. And I took a course in something recently that I'm not going to talk about here, but one of the most interesting things about it was they said, when you're emailing someone with a request, have only one question in that email. And I thought that was fascinating. Just one question, like, are you interested in this offer? Not nothing else, just the one question. And I think not to overwhelm people, that's an interesting idea too, is have just maybe one clear, at least just one clear offering. Hey, this is something that we've monetized, and or here's our way of serving you
Mhm.
at a price. Just one clear thing without all this clutter, and like you said, constantly barraging people. And that, what was the thing you said before about the confusion is losing, or something to that effect?
Yeah, when you
Right.
confuse, you lose. So that's not mine,
Right.
that's Donald Miller, but
Right.
it's true, because
Right.
when, and I think sometimes it comes from a well-meaning place, right? More often than not, we want to help other people, and we're just like,
Right.
ah,
Right.
you get
Right.
so excited. You just like, oh my gosh, I can do all of this stuff. And what we forget is that when we're on social media, A, we're being social, but B, what does social actually really mean? Well, it typically means that we're starting to build a relationship with somebody, and we wouldn't automatically meet somebody like we would in a, grocery store even, and
Right.
or the coffee shop, and you start to recognize the same faces and the same names over and over again. Well, eventually you start up a conversation, but that doesn't happen immediately, or maybe it does for some of
Right.
you, but
Right.
even then you start with
Mhm.
hopefully hello,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Hi, how are you? So like
Mhm.
very basic things. And
Right.
it,
Maybe a compliment is also good.
yeah.
Right.
But
Mhm.
when we go back and forth, John,
Mhm.
when you ask one question, you allow the other person to answer. And you know that if
Right.
you, in a real life conversation, if you
Mhm.
ask them more questions, chances are they may say, well, wow, that's a lot of questions. And they're only going to
Right.
answer one,
Right.
or they don't
Right.
answer at all.
Right.
Like,
Right. Right. It's
where do you want
overwhelming
me
again.
to be?
Right. So it's good to just have the one. Just one last thing I wanted to mention, and you
Yeah.
mentioned how social media is good for introverts, because you don't have to deal with that same face-to-face thing. But I find what I think is very interesting is, and tell me if you've encountered this, so many people consider themselves to be introverts.
Mhm.
It blows my mind that people that I have known personally, who I look at and envy their ability to be so outgoing and social, and they will say, oh, well, I'm an introvert. And I find, so when you, if you ever been in a room when they ask how many people consider themselves introverts, every hand goes up.
That's me. That's
That's
me.
you, see?
You know what the funny thing is? You
Right.
never have to worry about the extroverts, because you can tell, and they typically,
Right.
if you say who's an introvert, like we will either volunteer or we'll claim it.
Right.
Oh, I'm an
Right.
introvert. Like that's
Right.
almost second thing out of your mouth as you introduce yourself.
Yeah.
That's kind of the running
Right.
joke. Well, there's two things.
Right.
I mean, being introverted is more about how you recharge your expenditure of energy. And so I consider myself to be a learned extrovert in terms of just being more outgoing and more gregarious
Right. Right.
than my introverted self would normally like to
Mhm.
be. But I have to recharge alone. Like that's the
That's
definition of
interesting.
introversion versus extroversion. Whereas extroverts,
Right.
which my sister is one,
Right.
she loves being around people.
Mhm.
It's her definition of like the bee's knees, because that's how she draws energy.
Right.
It fuels her. And instead of
Right.
draining her like it does for me, it
Mhm.
makes her more excited.
Right.
So
And she wants to do it. Yeah.
yeah, and I think this
Mhm.
is where the power of social media really levels the playing field for
Hmm.
business owners who are introverted, who have felt like I I'm not outgoing, I'm not charismatic. It's really hard for me to strike up a conversation with somebody
Right,
randomly at a networking event, and oh my gosh, like I only have 2 hours before all of the cocktail stuff is gone, and what
right,
am I going to do?
right.
Right. And I think where social media allows us that freedom and flexibility,
Mhm.
especially, is because you can do it where it suits you and when it
Mhm.
suits
And
you.
when it does, right,
Yeah.
right.
And they're more intimate conversations, even though you might
Mhm.
have a lot of
Mhm.
people follow. I mean,
Mhm.
the thought of even 300, 400, 500 people coming to your home, because even if you have a small number of social media followers, whatever that
Right.
number is, chances are it's more than you could fit in your house.
That's true. Yeah, right. That's true. Right. And all you're going to invite is 5 or 6 normally. Right.
Right.
Yeah, I never thought of
Right.
it that
But
way.
I
Right.
mean, most people
All these
aren't going to
people.
host a party for 100 or
Right.
200 people.
Right.
And yet we have access to that many
Mhm.
people, which can feel
Mhm.
overwhelming. But at the same
Right.
time, there's some intimacy involved with being
Mhm.
able to have what feels like one-on-one conversations sometimes, as we're
Mhm.
responding to our followers, as we're engaging in our
Right.
comment, as we're creating and cultivating content that is specifically there to serve the people who are asking
Right.
for it of us. And I think this
Mhm.
is where introverts in particular can shine, because we're good listeners. We like to go narrow and deep.
Right.
You can preserve your energy based on when you
Right.
are
Right.
feeling.
When you're at your strongest to do it.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah. I've often liked to go live when I'm on a shoot because then I'm in that zone and I
You're
feel
on, right?
good. Right. I
Yeah.
feel like now I can do it. But if I were just sitting in a house watching TV, I might not be as motivated. Yeah. That makes perfect sense. Well, I
Yeah.
really want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us about social media sales and everything. Like, very interesting talking to you. So seriously, really appreciate that.
Oh, you're
Tell
welcome.
us again where we find you.
So you can find me across all social media channels at Susan McVeigh. And if you want to grab my free gift for you, so if it would be of service to find out a little bit more about how I built a 6-figure business in 6 months, I know that there's a lot of creatives that you support here and maybe looking at ways to be able to continue to serve your audience. You can grab that free resource at susanmcveigh.com/camera.
Right. There you go. Perfect word for camera work. Well, thank you. And I hope when you're in New York City at some point, we can hook up, have a cup of coffee. Love to talk to you in person some more. All right. But really, thank you for putting in the time to talk to us. And let's do it again at some point. All right.
You're welcome. Thanks so much
All
for
right.
having me.
Thank you. Good night.